It's slime time on the Collector's Cut as we take a look at the second outing in the Ghostbusters franchise. Many disregard this as an inferior sequel, and it certainly has its sillier moments. But let's revisit the film and see if we agree. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
Very good, Peter. Short, but pointless.
Very good. Thank you, and welcome to the show, everyone. This is a movie podcast. We are working through the Ghostbusters franchise on the build-up, of course, to the new entry coming out. We did the original last week, and this week we'll be looking at 1989's Ghostbusters 2. So, yep, that's what we're going to talk about. We'll give you a warning before we go into spoilers. If you so happen to not know what happens in Ghostbusters 2 and want to keep spoiler-free and just get the opinions, we'll still do the format, although I expect very few of you will be in that boat. But
spoiler alert, there's some more ghosts.
There's some ghosts. There's some other things as well.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, before we get into it, I'll just remind you, if you're enjoying the show, please do hit the like button. It helps out a bunch if you do. More people will find us. And of course, you can support us over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonus shows that me and David do monthly. I'll tell you more about them at the end. But we'll get into it. Obviously, we were very positive about Ghostbusters. It's one of the most famous pop culture movies of all time. Very neatly led into a lot of marketing and toys and a cartoon. Although, funnily enough, I think the cartoon did start more around the time of the sequel rather than the first movie. But
I think it was closer to that, but I do know that some of the choices that were done in this movie were directly because of the cartoon. Like, they were adapting it to the cartoon itself. So it has been going at least for a little bit there.
It doesn't surprise me. And I think even just the new trailers for the new one kind of feel like it's taken some from the cartoon as well. But, yeah.
I mean, if I'm fully honest, I've seen exactly like 30 seconds of the cartoon. Like, I've never sat through and watched the whole thing.
It's not something I ever saw a lot of as a kid. I think, for whatever reason, I didn't catch it in the same way that I caught Turtles cartoon or Power Rangers or something like that. I think I saw maybe like 3 episodes several times, and that was it. I never saw anything else. But
dear Lord, it ran for 7 seasons? What?
Yeah, phenomenon, like I said.
Yeah.
So,
okay, so it started in 86. So it actually had like a good 3 years before this movie came out.
okay, that's actually right in the middle between the two movies then. Okay, fair enough. I think for some reason I always associated it more with 2 because it kind of felt like the marketing push to make it like it's going to be a movie, a cartoon, we're going to have comic books, we're going to have all the toys. It felt more, because I definitely felt in Ghostbusters 2 that there's intentionally some new things just for the sake of, we can sell alternate outfits and toys and things like that. Which is not even necessarily a complaint. I actually think the darker overalls they wear a couple of times in the movie do look quite good, and I'm on board with them. But I also feel like that decision to even make those is probably just because they can sell more toys with those.
Oh yeah, in this movie, once the Ghostbusters get going again, they have like a new sign on the side of their car, and I'm like, that's solely for the sake of no, your car is outdated now. We're gonna get you a new car toy that you can get.
To be fair, there's some different like doohickeys on top as well to give it a bit of an upgrade. But I will say, if I have just one broad complaint before we get into talk about the movie, and I'm going to be mostly positive on Ghostbusters 2, I'll tell everyone that right now. I like Ghostbusters 2.
All right.
I do think it's really stupid that in universe they switched to the Ghostbusters 2 logo for the actual business.
Yeah.
I think that is really freaking stupid.
Yeah, there's not a lot. I actually think that there's a bunch of stuff in this movie that they just don't explain as to why it's happening. You're just kind of meant to be like, oh yeah, just go along with it. Ghostbusters, it's fun like that. But that was the first one that I noticed. I didn't even notice it on the car. I noticed it on like one of their armbands or something.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
all have it. Yeah.
Yeah, like why did you change that? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I can't even like are they in the movie? Are they saying it's the peace sign? And they're freshened up to say because it doesn't make any sense for them to refer to themselves as this. This is Ghostbusters 2. We're the second coming of Ghostbusters. So it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work like that.
Especially because it's the exact same crew. If there was like, we mixed it up and we have a whole new like team here. We're the second Ghostbusters. But no, it's just everyone the exact same. Yeah, it's just the same one.
Or even in the newer movies, you could argue because it's like a new generation that are sort of taking the reins. You could argue, okay, the two kind of maybe, if they want to brand themselves as that, I could see it working. But
maybe it's just like a marketing thing, because obviously over the course of the opening of the movie, we see that the Ghostbusters have kind of become like a failed like business. It's a failed perspective. So they're like, no, this isn't the same Ghostbusters. We're a totally different Ghostbusters. Give us more money. It's
funny because I've heard people critique the franchise for something here that I'm going to defend a little bit, actually. And it starts in Ghostbusters 2, but it kind of, admittedly, it's maybe more egregious in later things because of the events of Ghostbusters 2, but at least early on in Ghostbusters, when a lot of people are skeptical if anything ever really happened, some people critique that and say, how could people not know that this was all really happening? I'm like, well, to be fair, there was only a small crowd versus the entire, inhabitants of New York, and this was before smartphones. No one was recording anything. No one was up in the roof. No one was seeing this shit. Like, the actual number of people who saw hard proof that all that stuff really happened in the first movie is very limited. And we have people these days with conspiracy theories about tons of stuff that is just factually correct. The idea that people would not believe that this stuff happened is the most believable thing to me in the world.
I guess the biggest thing is that in the first Ghostbusters, there's a whole bit where, like, the city itself, not just the climax of the movie, but everywhere across the city is facing down against ghosts to some extent. So you would think, like, okay, a population as big as New York City, you assume at least 1 in 50 of them run into a ghost over the course of that day. It's going to be enough to keep this story going. But I think that the idea of ghosts to the general population is just so extreme of a shift of, like, believing it, that I understand why there would be this reluctance, especially if all of a sudden it just stopped. If there was suddenly no more, and it's just like, well, what happened to that thing?
Yeah. And it's just occurring to me now, I think the reason why I associate the cartoon with this, and I only thought of this because you said the word extreme and it's called The Extreme Ghostbusters, is that I bet the show started around when they greenlit the second movie. I bet those things lined up quite a bit.
Okay, so there's actually 2 cartoon series. There's the real Ghostbusters.
Yeah, I know that, yeah.
And then there's Extreme Ghostbusters. Yeah, Real Ghostbusters was first. That was the one that aired in that time period. Extreme Ghostbusters didn't start until 1997.
That was the second show, yeah. Oh, that's fair enough. But I would bet the deal for that show and the green lighting of the second movie, I bet those were kind of around the same time, if not part of a larger push by Columbia/Sony.
I'm sure it was just one of those. Again, we all know Sony and how they love their IPs. They're sitting there like, how do we milk some money out of this without actually doing a whole nother movie?
Oh, Madame Web's out in a couple of weeks at the time of recording. It'll already be out by the time you get this, I think. But
Madame Web, I won't give my opinion because there's no way I'm watching it.
Even though they've got Dakota Johnson doing really weirdly horny little messages on Twitter to try and convince people.
I've watched 50 Shades of Grey. I don't need that anymore.
No, but this is opposite. Now she's the Dom. That's what the appeal is.
Wasn't that the point of the whole trilogy? Check out our review on the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy.
You're going to reveal that I've forgotten everything about that movie.
Same.
Outside of 2 key funny bits that I might remember. Anyway, Ghostbusters 2. We're going to get into it. We'll get into the plot and all that, but we'll give some general feelings first. We've already kind of started talking about the overall idea, but David, how do you feel about Ghostbusters 2?
Oh God, I enjoyed.
Oh, I'm getting some mixed.
Was watching.
I'm getting some mixed signals here.
I guess I'll jump into the sad part of it, is that it feels so lifeless. Compared to the first one, so close together. What was really getting me about that first one is that it really felt like these were just a bunch of comedians just like bantering off each other, and they were like improving so much of this, or at least it felt that way. This one felt like every single thing was scripted, and whereas the last one, I'd say there was a laugh every 30 seconds tops, this one managed to go long stretches of time between what I consider to be a good, solid joke. So I think that really takes it down for me. On top of that, I do have a problem with it. Without getting too deep into the plot, it does have this problem where it doesn't explain enough, I think, or it just kind of makes some random leaps and expects you as the audience to go with it.
Sure.
So Yeah, overall, I think this is kind of just a more lifeless, less thought out movie than the first one. So it's disappointing in that way. But I did still have some level of fun with it. It was still fun to see the characters return. I think that the overall storyline had potential to it. Whether or not they delivered, I'll get to. But yeah, it's just kind of a disappointment for me with what I was coming out of a 10 with the last one.
Don't get me wrong, like I do think it is a weaker movie than the first one. I think the pacing isn't quite as good. It doesn't feel as tight in that respect. There's definitely the odd moment that feels like this is just Ghostbusters 2's version of that moment in the first one. There's definitely a few of the moments like that. Where I will defend it though is that I do think there's a lot of great moments in it, and maybe it's less successful as a outright comedy, but as far as like enjoying the actual story, there's a lot of things in here I really like. I love everything in the courtroom, which we'll talk about more definitively, later. I think the chemistry between Venkman and Dana is actually better in this movie. I think they've got a really sweet kind of romance in this movie versus the first one, where it feels a little bit more mature and a little bit more like I actually kind of buy that she likes him in this one in a way that it worked in the first movie for what it was trying to do. But this actually felt a bit like it had a bit more heart to it. I do think the villain's better. I still like the villain.
I agree. I think the villain in concept is better, but I think that the plot that the villain has in place is weaker in general. I think the character himself is better, but the plot is weaker.
Yeah. So I think like Ghostbusters 1 is absolutely the better movie. It, like we said last time, it's lightning in a bottle, and this can't be lightning in a bottle again. It's almost impossible to do that. But I think this is a pretty solid movie trying to follow up that movie, if that makes sense. It's full of great bits. There are some jokes that I do think are really funny, and I do kind of overall like what it is. But that said, the biggest thing that for me was sticking out was just little lulls here or there where it was like setting stuff up for like the next act, and it would feel like it was maybe having to go through some beats just to get through them, as opposed to every scene itself as a gift. It was more like, okay, we have to go through a few of these little scenes that aren't as interesting to get to the better stuff, to get to the payoffs and whatnot. But I think it's definitely a sequel in every sense of the word. But I think there's a lot to love in here. So I do defend it when I hear people just like shit on it as if it's, what's a sequel to compare it to? I don't know. I feel like these days, now that we're getting all these nostalgia sequels, there's something actually endearing about a sequel like this, which is, it's not got the same spark of creativity the first one did, but it doesn't feel as like it almost feels
soulless. Yeah,
it doesn't feel like it's wearing its, or it does feel like it's wearing its commercialism on its sleeve. Like by making the like a lot of the brand stuff like a part of the movie itself, it almost feels like this kind of self-aware thing. But there are a couple of things that don't get explained. There's a couple of, dare I say, the first examples in the franchise of them just doing something because people liked it in the first movie without having a good reason to do it. And there's a couple of moments like that I will bring up and criticize for.
Yeah, I also felt like, because it felt like there was a lot less improv and all the lines were kind of set in stone as they were filming, there was this feeling of them kind of performing it differently from, I guess, the way that it was written. I don't know the best way to describe it, but even in the courtroom scene, and we'll get to it, but there's this sequence when they're powering on the proton packs, and they have this weird little thing that implies it's like a running joke, implies a thing that we're supposed to recognize from the last movie, but that wasn't there. Like it runs a joke here that feels like a running joke, but the running joke never started in the last movie.
Did they not do that in the elevator in the first movie?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if you consider it a spoiler or not what it is, but...
Well, no, I'm trying to... for some reason, I phantomed that into the last movie, but you might be... You may be right. I think that's fair. Obviously, we've got a new set of songs in this one, but admittedly, they were smart enough to use the original theme both at the start and the end. They knew people would want that, and that's still the real main theme, so...
Yes, so I specifically want to say on the soundtrack, two things. One, because I know that in the 2016 movie, there is a remake of the original by, I think it's Fall Out Boy. I want to get clear. There's also a Run DMC like rap version of it in this movie. Not a great version, but I will say it is at least fine. It fits in well enough. It feels like it's of the era.
It's inoffensive.
Yeah. So I want to say, when I get to the next movie and I say, how dare they? I want you to know I'm acknowledging it happened here as well. But secondly, last movie, I specifically said how I didn't think the soundtrack was like all that memorable outside of the main theme. I absolutely love On Our Own from this soundtrack. The one by Bobby Brown, well, I guess we'll have to take control. Love that. It's been in my head on repeat for the past 2 days since I watched this movie. Loved it.
Yeah, soundtrack's good. I like this. I think the score as well does a few more fantastical things. It's almost like, you know, I talked a lot about how the first one was this comedy about these three schlubs starting a business to make money. This one, because the Ghostbusters are already an established thing, that idea of it's kind of lost, and now they're just kind of returning heroes, which kind of changes the tone a little bit. For you know, for better or worse, depending on how you feel. I think worse would be understandable overall, but I don't see how you bring them back and sort of keep the tone of the start of the first one, because things have changed. It can't be that again. And if anything, I would probably criticize them if they really forced it, you know?
See, but that's where I would disagree in that. I feel like they were trying to force it by just making it so that everyone in New York is like, all right, we don't believe you.
Oh, no, okay.
Like that thing didn't happen.
True, they kind of try to, but I don't think they succeed. And I think they could have went further to try and do it. And I think I respect that. Okay, we're going to set up that they've kind of split up and they're not Ghostbusters anymore, and no one really respects them. But it's not like we're going to get together and start a business. Like, their reasons for even working together again are far more, you know, like heroic. It's about helping someone. It's not about, you know. So that part of it, that idea of it, is completely gone in this. It's just more about these are unsung heroes now, as opposed to like capitalists.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that doesn't stop Peter like several times in this movie, just trying to cash in. But
yeah, of course he is. You know,
that's just his character. That's fine.
Yeah. So yeah, as far as anything else goes, obviously, much like the first movie, there's a lot of effects.
Yes, I think highly improved. I think that they really took it. Maybe they got like ILM in the meantime, but I think that they got really improved special effects this time around.
Yeah, I think what was interesting about watching this and paying attention to the effects, because I don't think it's a spoiler to say there's a lot of slime in this movie. It's kind of what a lot of the plot revolves around.
Every second movie in the 80s was about the ooze.
Well, Turtles 2 was the 90s, but you know, whatever. Oh,
yeah, okay, fine. Early 90s, late 80s.
So, not to ruin your joke, but I felt like that was specifically what you were referencing.
I mean, I can't think of any others, so yeah, that's probably it.
No, I was paying attention to these effects because this is the year that The Abyss came out. So while it's possible they could have done some stuff with CG, I don't think they did. Or if they did, it was very minimal, because a lot of it is either sort of old school optical effects, but there was definitely times where it was more like they had like a practical sort of shape that the ooze had meant to form into, sort of coming out of a pool of liquid, but kind of like merged together to look like it was the ooze coming up and forming the shape. So it kind of looked an optical effect, but sometimes it was more like a big sock puppet kind of like. Yeah. It was kind of an interesting mix of styles that made it work, and I enjoyed all that stuff. I enjoyed most of the ooze stuff, if I'm honest. Like one of the reasons why I think I enjoy this movie as much as I do is because I think that's a fun thing for them to deal with.
Yeah, I enjoyed the concept and the way that the ooze looked over it, but I do think that by the time we hit the end of the movie, the ooze just kind of does things that some of it gets a full explanation and some of it's just left to, just accept that this is how it has to work or else we can't continue.
They set it up. They set a good bit of it up.
They do, but there are specific. I mean, it's totally spoilers, so I can't go into it. But there are specific bits where I feel like they're like, just accept that we're able to do this with the ooze, or else we'd have to take an extra 20 minutes of explaining how we do it.
Yeah, okay, we'll get into all that. So as far as like cast additions go, obviously everyone pretty much from the first movie's back. The two main additions, all on I guess the main villain, who we'll just talk about later. Yes. We got Peter McNichol, who I mean, I know him from this first, admittedly, but the other main thing I know him from is the Mr. Bean movie, which is the movie where you realize, oh, he's just an American. He's putting on an accent in Ghostbusters 2.
I mean, to be fair, that didn't surprise me. Even when I was a kid, I was like, that doesn't seem real.
It doesn't surprise me either, but he's not even like from somewhere. He's just straight up American.
Yeah.
And then the other sort of main recurring characters played by Kurt Fuller, who most people will probably know from Wayne's World, but he's popped up in a bunch of things around the late 80s and early 90s. He's like the mayor's assistant in this movie. That said, though, there was a lot of faces in small roles that I was recognizing throughout this. The judge was in a few episodes of the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, for a start, amongst other things.
Never heard of it.
He's very prolific. There's a mum at a birthday party at the start who is the therapist in all the Lethal Weapon movies, as well as a few other things here or there. So I recognized her. And then there was someone else that I'm sure will come up as we're talking about things, but there was like a bunch of faces I was recognizing.
The kid at the very beginning who chews out Ray and Winston is actually Jason Reitman.
Oh, really? Well, okay. I wouldn't. Yeah. Obviously, he looks different, but
yeah, absolutely. But I'm just saying, he had a little thing there where he's saying, like, my dad says you guys are frauds, and it's like, oh, hell, hey, I wonder who his dad is.
Very funny. Very funny. So yeah. All right, we ready to go to spoilers? Are we ready to...
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that's too big of an ask before we start spoiling things, so I'm good.
Yeah, I think I'm good to jump in. All right, so spoilers from this point on for Ghostbusters 2. You've been warned in case you're not familiar with it. I do actually really like how this movie starts, which is just a big screen saying 5 years later. And it doesn't need it because in real time it was 5 years later, so it's not even like it's just the concept of time. People will get it, but it does give it a bit of a feeling like, oh, okay, all right, boom, right, let's get into it then.
I know that this one came well beforehand, but I immediately just jumped into the Avengers Endgame mindset where I'm like, oh yeah, this is it. We're going with a huge time skip.
So yeah, we're introduced to Dana again, who now has a baby named Oscar, right? That's what the movie opens with. Yep. And the big event that happens here is that the baby carriage starts moving on its own, and she starts frantically chasing after it. And it ends up in the middle of an intersection in New York, and it stops, and she's able to get the baby back, but she's freaked out, and the theme song kicks in, and it's like, okay, this is Ghostbusters 2. This is our inciting incident.
And I do think it's smart that, I mean, you say the introduction is Dana, but literally the very first shot is the ooze like seeping through the sidewalk. Yeah. And it gets onto the baby carriage, so you're immediately introduced to, okay, this is the thing we're going to be spending some time with. This is this pink slime.
I think there's a few little smart things this script actually does about setting up things for later. As much as, like, I'm sure a lot of your complaints about them not explaining everything are valid when we get to a lot of those things, there's a lot of things I was noticing, like that little moment just to set that up, that I think do foreshadow stuff that comes later. The big thing, we'll just go to it now. This is not the very next scene, but just to continue with Dana for a second. The next scene we see her, after we see a few other characters, we'll go back to those scenes. She goes to, she's clearly looking for an address, and it's like at a university or something. And it turns out this is where Egon is. Egon's doing some studies. And there's some funny bits in this scene, actually. Egon cracked me up here a few times. But he's doing like behavioral studies, psychology studies, where he's got like people in a room who aren't aware they're part of an experiment. And it's basically the thing from Community where they're making this married couple who think they're here for marriage counseling just wait. They're being told to wait over and over. And they've been there for like 2 hours. They're turning up the temperature, and they've just been asked to wait more, and they're getting angry. And then the next window's this little girl who's been given a puppy, and they're sort of monitoring her happiness levels. And this is actually one of the little things that I thought was quite smart, is this entire experiment is actually setting up the key themes that the entire ooze operates around, which is positive and negative emotions. So yeah,
they have Egon explicitly say that it's whether or not the environment can be changed based off of the mood of the people in it. So that is, I watching the film back, knowing what was coming there, I was like, okay, I see what you're doing here. You're laying down the groundwork for what's coming ahead.
Yeah, I like that. But the little things that you always do is making me laugh. Is Dana's explaining this creepy thing that happened and so on, and there's a little moment where she's like, "So, do you ever see Venkman?" And he's like, "Sometimes." And she's like, "Does he ever talk about me?" And she sort of stands there monologuing about how she feels, and he's got this scanner that he's been using on his subjects to sort of like scan their happiness or whatever, or their mood or whatever. purely made up invention, but he's scanning them with this doohickey, and as she's talking and he's standing behind her, he just sort of like moves his arm over and scans her as she's talking about Venkman, just to sort of like see what it says. And we never get told what it says. We just get his reaction of like his curious face being like, interesting.
It's the moment he's like, oh, does he ever talk about me? And he says no, and then immediately puts the device next to her, being like, how does that make you feel? All right, cool.
Egon, everyone's a test subject to Egon.
Oh yeah. Well, that's I think the best punchline in the whole movie is Egon's one there, where after Dana walks away.
Oh, I love this. Yeah, I know what you're going to say. Go on.
Egon says, all right, look, we'll help. I'm going to bring Ray in on this to do some investigation. And Dana leaves. They're looking at the girl in the room with the puppy, and then he just turns to his assistant and be like, let's try taking away the puppy. And it's just like, it's such. I understand why there are ethics committees. It's solely for people like Egon.
Well, we heard in the first movie that he was going to drill a hole into his own brain for science, so he doesn't have limits, right? He's very much willing to do anything to himself or anyone else for the sake of science. But yeah, I thought this was a great little scene, interesting Egon. Before this, we already got the Rain Winston sort of reintroduction, which is, we cut to the Ecto one and it's driving through the city. You think they're on a case, but the payoff to this is that it's a kid's birthday party, and this is what they do now to make some money, is they'll go to the birthday party, and this also establishes that the song is in universe now. Like, this song has become a thing, and they're singing and dancing to the song. But, of course, the kids all yell for He-Man instead of Ghostbusters when they say, who are you going to call? Crushing their spirits dearly.
Don't get me wrong. I understand He-Man at this point is wildly popular, huge with the kids, but if I had to hire for my children's birthday party a large muscular man barely wearing any clothing, I think I'd have more problems than answers there.
Maybe the mom would have liked that, though.
The mom would be fine.
Something for the kids, something for her.
I'm just saying I don't think the kids actually know what they want. Because as soon as that guy walked in the door, they'd be like, oh, God, why is he here?
Unless he treats it like he's a stripper where he's wearing clothes, but then when they say He-Man, he rips the clothes off. Like,
he's like, hello, I am Adam of Eternia. And it's like, oh, where's your sword, Adam? And he's like, oh, I got a sword for you, all right.
This is taking a dark turn. I don't like it. This reminds me of the other face that I recognised. Because when we cut to Venkman and we see what he's doing with his time now, he's got a crappy cable, like, TV talk show. Right, one of these little bottom of the barrel things where he talks to like psychics and paranormal people. So he's kind of banking on his like minor fame of being in the Ghostbusters by doing this. But the guy that's there, he's got two people he's interviewing, and the guy is the dad. It's Kevin Dunn, I believe his name is, from the Transformers movies. This is Mr. Witwicky from Transformers.
Well, I would not have gotten that because I refuse to watch those movies again. So good on you.
He's been in other things as well, to be fair, but he was in 3 of those, and I had to watch them all last year, so that he's fresh in the memory. And they're just talking about believing the end of the world's coming, and I enjoy this scene as well because Peter's so cynical, because the guy's like, oh, it's going to end on New Year's Eve, and he's got a book out called It's the End of the World, and Peter's like, that's a bit inconvenient. That's not enough time to sell your hardcovers and your paperbacks, and then by the time the movie deal comes, the world's going to be over. Like, this is not good for you at all.
Just 100% capitalist mind. He thinks that everyone else is in on the grift like he is.
And then the woman who's there is like, no, it's the world's going to end in Valentine's Day 2016. And I remember actually when we hit 2016, people were sharing this all over Twitter because, of course.
I remember that too. I actually went back and looked Google News just to see if like the Sony, because obviously Ghostbusters 2016 was announced by that point. I wanted to see if they did anything special on that date. Nah, they just like had a new teaser trailer like 3 or 4 days before. Completely wasted opportunity.
Yeah, why not just wait a few days and say, hey, it's the end of the world day from Ghostbusters 2. Yeah, that's what weird.
You'd think, but no. Sony failing to capitalize on news cycles.
Yeah. We've seen where the 4 Ghostbusters are. Although, we find out more about Ray. He's actually running a cult bookstore, which is something that they kind of keep going through the future movies, and I think the video game mentions it as well. Like, this is something this is like his permanent thing now. He's got an occult bookstore. We get introduced to all the characters again. We see that the mayor's got this dickhead assistant who hasn't let Peter talk to him.
Yeah, it turns out the mayor's running for governor, I believe it is.
Yes.
So he's definitely capitalizing off the idea of I'm the one who saved New York, but everyone else is like, nah, screw that guy who did the Ghostbusters stuff. They're not important.
But the big thing is that Dana specifically said to Egon is to not tell Venkman, right? You can bring in Ray, you can do all your Ghostbustery stuff, try and help me out here, but don't bring in Venkman. And then Venkman just bullies Ray. So he'll tell him, he's like, oh, we're working on something. For who for? An old friend. Who's that? Is it, oh, it's someone we know. Oh, is that right?
Now, that scene there that you're describing, it's an okay enough scene. I'm fine with it. It gets the point across. It does what it needs to do. But I feel like that was the first time where I was like, oh, this is all as scripted. This is all as it was in the script. Because I can just imagine like a whole bit where they would have done back and forth. They would have set up this sort of improv style to getting the info out, but it just didn't feel that way.
I think part of that might be, and I hate to do this, but it might solely be on Bill Murray, because Aykroyd and Ramis wrote the script for this one again, so they're quite happy with the material, obviously.
Yeah.
It's been a constant critique for Bill Murray that he's never really cared about the idea of going back to Ghostbusters. He's not really a franchise guy. He's never, he's got artistic integrity, one may say, or he's a grumpy old
bastard.
He's a grumpy old shit, or either, whatever. And I think the idea that he's just showing up and reading from the script as opposed to actually giving it all the energy that he normally would when he really cares about a project is maybe what you're noticing there.
Yeah, I mean, I did look into a bit of the trivia history as to like, why did it take 5 years for Ghostbusters 2 to get made? And apparently it was Murray and a couple other people, but mostly Murray, was unhappy with the head of Columbia at that time because of like comments they made specifically at Murray. So he swore never to work with him. He also went on hiatus from acting for a little bit there. And it was only once the head of Columbia switched out, and there was also a writer's strike around this time, that he finally was brought to the negotiation table and said, all right, can we get Ghostbusters 2 off the ground?
Yeah, that sounds right, because I always remember that the script for Halloween 4 was like finished right before the writer's strike started. The writer was like trying to get it done before the strike started, so it was in the can, as it were. So Venkman kind of like shoehorns his way into the whole investigation. He goes with them over to Dana's place, and there's some fun stuff here. You know, this is one of the moments though where I did notice, like, it's like in the first movie they asked Venkman to get a sample of the goo at in the very first scene in the library, and they kind of repeat that here, and it's an okay repetition moment because it's a different context. It's a stool sample from the kid, right? See if the kids get anything, any shit, and he's left there standing holding the little circular like tray to get it, I do appreciate this one. I think it's maybe a more of an ongoing problem as it goes on throughout the movie, and you get these little moments that are kind of like redoing a moment. I think it's fine to subvert them because the audience of a movie expects certain things from a sequel. So when you take it and you do a new spin on it, I'm okay with that. And I think the idea that this is just a regular kids, droppings is a little funnier because it's like, okay, this isn't a supernatural thing he's been asked to do this time. This is just him being awkward around a baby. And it even kind of fits into the themes of the idea that him and Dana broke up, and maybe part of the reason why they broke up is that he wasn't ready to sort of grow up and have a proper relationship, That's, if you look back at the last movie, Venkman's whole, I wouldn't say arc, but it is essentially him starting out as the skeptic, and then over the course of the movie, more and more buying in until he becomes the quote-unquote hero. I think that for a character where they want to say he kind of bought into that hero thing, he kind of enjoyed seeing himself in such an important role, to then say, okay, now your problem is you need to get back to real life. And so you have basically his major obstacle here being growing up, becoming a father figure to this kid, and coming back down to earth. I think that's a good way, if they are going to reintroduce old jokes and like old situations from the last movie, reframing them in that way is a smart way to do it. Yeah, and I think it's one of the better parts of the movies, him and Dana's really, as much as I'm saying maybe the reason why that snappy ad-lib dialogue isn't there is because Murray wasn't giving it his all. He still does a good job at actually just performing the role. Like, he's just not ad-libbing the same way perhaps as he was before. I like there's a couple other lines from Egon here that I really like. When they're looking in the kid's room and he's like, "Oh, my parents didn't believe in toys," and it cuts back to them later and Ray's like, "So you never even had a slinky?" He's like, "I had part of a slinky. I straightened it," and he's completely deadpan. Like,
I feel like this movie is the one that really just spread out Egon. It really gave him more funny lines. It gave him more of a center stage to do things, and all the better for it, because I love his deadpan delivery.
I do too, and I think actually that's why I don't have a problem with that joke you were saying doesn't have enough of a setup in the court, because I love the idea that Egon's whole thing in this movie is that while Venkman has to come down from smelling his own farts a bit too much, Egon could do with smelling his own farts a bit more. So I love cocky Egon, where he's like throwing himself into the spotlight a little bit with those moments. I kind of appreciate that.
That's fair. I think that when we get to it, that one just goes a bit too far. That one's just a bit too much of a, like, it seems like a callback that's not calling back to anything.
Yeah, but the shit-eating grin he's got in his face as he says it still cracks me up.
That's fine. That's fine.
I can't. I just enjoy it too much to be mad at it.
All right.
So yeah, so they look into the baby. Venkman flirts a little bit, and I do think it's like, when I was talking about the sweet moments here, there's a little moment where he's like joking around with the kid, and he's like making jokes about, "Oh, you're ugly. Your father must have been ugly," and he's sort of using the kid as a way to make fun of her ex. But it's actually kind of sweet in a way. Like, as much as he's saying all these things, he's doing it in a kind of a jokey way, and you can kind of see it on Sigourney Weaver's performance that she's very endeared by. It's like, oh, there's a reason why I like this guy. He is a doofus, but there's something to it. It's not just being an asshole.
Yeah. I guess just to give the audience the little bit of backstory that they give us. So the last movie happened, they did stay in a relationship for a little bit, but again, she basically wanted him to commit, and he just wasn't. He was dragging his feet about it. So they broke up, and she found someone who, I guess from her like orchestra, someone that plays an instrument as well. She got married, she got pregnant from this guy, and then he got a deal for some amazing like tour out in Europe or something, and they were already having some problems, so they ended up divorcing, and that led back to now.
Yeah, so yep. So from here, they go outside, take scans of where the whole baby thing happened in the first place, which is in the middle of the street. Cut to them in like workman gear and hard hats, drilling into the middle of the street without any permits. And so, of course, eventually a cop rolls up and starts asking who they are. And they all just kind of go into character of doing like thick New York accents and complaining about how hard their job is.
Yeah. See, this is the one scene that I felt like was maybe improv. This is the one time I felt like it was just, maybe it was all scripted, but it felt like Bill Murray was just playing the bit character. He was playing like the same sort of thing he would back on SNL, where he's just like, I got a wife and kids, and I'm sitting out here drilling a hole, and you're asking me why I'm drilling the hole? Maybe because I'm doing my job.
Yeah, and when the cop comes back later with a guy from the phone company, he's like, hey, we're like, you're not from the phone company. The cop says, oh, you got another one to sell me? And he just goes into a character about how there's like a gas line's been ruptured and they're there to save the day and stuff. And it's like, he's obviously lying at this point. There's no resuscitating like the opinion here as far as these people questioning you goes, but he's still just going in 110%. But the big thing that happens here is that they send down Ray once they're through the concrete, and he ends up in kind of like an old underground subway system that's not used anymore, and it's just flowing with this pink, slime that's just flowing. I do love how it looks when you get a close-up of the actual flow of it. Like, I can only imagine the random shit they threw into like a mix to make this move the way it does with the various shades of pink and purple.
I'm sure there's some special feature documentary thing that goes into the special effects team saying, here is exactly what it was made of.
Maybe, sadly, it's one of those things where all it's got is like a 15-minute thing. The first movie's got a bunch of stuff, but they don't give the second one the same amount of love, so it doesn't get the same depth, if you will, as far as the extras goes. But
so as they're pulling up Ray, he accidentally kicks an old like rusty pipe or something. It trips a power cable, and all of New York goes into a blackout because of them.
Oh, let's also not gloss over the fact that part of the slime sort of raises up and tries to grab him, and he's freaking out until they pull him up.
Little things like that happening, yeah.
Yeah, that's important for the plot. The slime's alive.
Well, if we're also talking important to the plot here, I think we need to talk about intercut between all of this is Janosch at the museum.
Is this before this part? It might be, I guess.
Well, we at least have the introduction of him with Dana at this point.
Yeah,
we definitely have that by now.
Yeah, as far as like recurring a thing from the first movie, this is the new character who's got the hots for Dana, who she doesn't have any interest in. That said, though, he's a very different character and he fits into the plot in a very different way. I mean, okay, you could argue that the villain takes over him in the same way that Rick Moranis was taken over in the first one, but that was like a much later in the movie thing, whereas in this one, he's taken over and he's like the... What would you call it? The Renfield.
Lackey. Yeah.
The Renfield for like most of the movie.
Yeah, but I think that's the major difference here is that in the first movie, Lewis was forced into the role, whereas this one, he's much more of a willing participant, it feels like.
Oh, he's making deals. He's like, hey, I'll help you get the baby if you give me the mum. Well, he's all about her.
And yeah, that's the other thing is that he is full on creep. He is 100% like into Dana, but not in a respectful, like, hey, let me take you out to dinner, like Peter sort of way. It is he is a, like, I'm going to sniff your hair when you're not looking kind of creep.
He almost gets that's the sniffing the hair, but like some of the stuff he says, he almost sort of hides behind the fact that his English is broken. Right? And like it's almost like he's just counting on the other person, just letting him away with it because he doesn't understand exactly how the specifics of what he just said. He's just sort of dancing around what he's trying to say, and as a result I have to let him away with it. But he knows he's been a creep.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. I'm sure him being Dana's boss here, there was some sort of line about him being or her being under him, and I just immediately blanked it out from my mind.
Ever see the big painting of what would you call
Vigo?
Vigo, yes, Vigo, the villain. Who I didn't really like. The actor apparently is one of the bad guys in Die Hard. He's like one of the random Germans in Die Hard.
Okay. Well, I will say I was Wilhelm von Homburg was the actor. However, they dubbed over him with Max von Sydow for the entirety of it.
Oh, okay. All right.
The only problem with that is that they didn't tell him they were doing that, and so he had to find out at the premiere, and he wasn't very happy about it.
Oh, yeah, that's a bit shitty. They should have told him.
Yeah.
Yeah, they should have told him. That's a shame. So they get arrested, right, for illegally digging in the middle of the street, for knocking out the power, and we find out as well after the fact that there's actually not a law, an injunction preventing them from investigating anything paranormal. The Ghostbusters were effectively banned in New York City. And they have broken that rule by investigating something paranormal. So this is actually I love the introduction here to Lewis, who...
Oh, yeah.
He just sort of enters as their lawyer, and he even points out, I'm more of a tax lawyer. This isn't really my area of expertise.
I got my law degree at night. Well, that's okay, Lewis. We got arrested at night.
But one of the biggest laughs I had up to this point is when he makes his opening case.
Yep.
And he just sort of is like, these are the Ghostbusters and they saved the world, and this one time I turned into a dog and they saved me. I rest my case. And he just sits back down. And that's his whole thing. And it just made me laugh. It's just the delivery, the way he just ends it rapidly, all of it very funny.
I'm actually curious, when was Spaceballs released?
Before this, I think.
Before this, but was it after the original one? Yes. So it was 1987. I'm thinking that when they were writing this script, they were like, okay, hold on. Rick Moranis has got like real, like strong leading potential in terms of comedy. Let's give him a lot more lines than we gave him in the first one.
Oh, yeah, he's got more to do. I think one of the things that a lot of successful sequels do is they expand a minor character into a bigger character in the second one. And I think he's a fine one to choose in this case for that. I think the idea that they need a lawyer, so he ends up working with them more naturally, and it makes sense that he wants to help them because they did save his life in the first one, so it's not like a forced connection either. It kind of it tracks. So there's a lot of cross-examining. The main thing here though is the judge keeps getting angry anytime Venkman cracks a joke or anytime someone does something he doesn't like, basically, right?
Yeah, so like Venkman's trying to basically hype up the audience, get them on his side,
showman.
Saying like, he's like saying, everyone remembers there's ghosts. We all know that. And who you gonna call? And everyone's like, yeah, that's the song. We remember the song. But it's that point where the judge is like, shut up. He's not even like silencing the court or order. He just yells "shut up" over and over again.
And he's getting angry, and this is setting up the ooze and the tie to the emotions, because it starts to bubble. So the sample that Ray got when he was dangling is in a jar as one of the evidence things on the table, and it starts to bubble. And as they get to the end of the thing, and the sentence has been read out, and he's like, oh, you get 18 months, you've got a fine, blah, blah, blah. He keeps getting angrier, and it starts to bubble, and the Ghostbusters and Tully notice it, and they're like, so they just start like hiding behind the table, and that just makes the judge angrier, which just makes the thing bubble more. And eventually it pops, and two ghosts sort of come out of it, and it's two ghosts that the judge himself sentenced to death from prior cases.
It's the Scoleri brothers.
So obviously this is all designed to prove that they are not shams, because now the judge and everyone else, including the attorney on the opposite side, the prosecutor, they're all like, you know, she gets picked up upside down and is like being dragged across the room at one point. Everyone's freaking out. All of this stuff I think is very entertaining. I love the build up to it. The only real complaint I have is that why does Winston disappear? Because Winston's there at the start of the court case, and then he disappears, and I thought when everything went down he should probably be like jumping in and like throwing them a proton pack or something. But I thought that it might have been a joke based off of the earlier joke in the movie of last movie where they were like, hey, no offense to you guys, but I'm getting my own lawyer. Oh, yeah, okay.
I wonder if that was maybe like a little payoff to that they just didn't properly reference, where he was like, no, my trial's next week because I got a different lawyer.
Well, no, he wouldn't have a trial because he wasn't there at the digging. It makes sense that he's not being like tried for anything, but it just it established that it was there, so I thought he was in the audience in the courtroom.
Yeah, that
and
makes sense.
then he just wasn't there when everything went down. It's not that Winston gets shortchanged either. Winston's there for the rest of the movie. He gets a lot of fun stuff to do later on. But
I that's one of those things where I feel like it may have just been in the script and then they just cut it out in post, because there's a couple things in this movie that I can point to and say, I think that there was more originally for this and they just kind of dropped it. Or maybe they banked on it being one of those things of like, not this Winston thing specifically, but the other things I'm talking about are banking on the idea of, oh, you watch real Ghostbusters. It's from the cartoon. Whatever we did in the cartoon, that's canon. So just take that coming in here.
Maybe, I don't know. Like, I think a lot of the audience watching the movie didn't see the cartoon.
No, that's fair. But there was clearly some changes they made. For instance, it's not a huge bit, so I'll just mention it now. Slimer's just hanging around. He's just there.
Yeah, that's the thing that feels like this is just here for fan service sake, right? Whether it's because of the cartoon, whether it's because people liked him in the first movie. It's just random. It's just there, and there's no reason for it. It's only 2 scenes. It's 2 quick bits. It's just like a little joke. But which I think is probably why it doesn't feel super intrusive, because it's not like it feeds into the plot or anything. It's just part of a montage, basically.
There was apparently a third segment where Lewis was trying to capture Slimer as he was around the Ghostbusters HQ, and they just cut it. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's like no explanation except for Slimer was around in the cartoon and he is a well-recognized ghost. So they're just putting him here because the audience needs to have that little part of their monkey brain activate that says that's a familiar thing.
Yeah. Pills in comparison to the modern movies when they're trying to nostalgia bait you, but it's definitely an early example of that. It's the one thing in the movie that feels like it is just there so the audience can clap and go, hey, Slimer, we recognize him. Right.
So back to the courtroom scene, though. The one joke that I just couldn't get behind is they get their proton packs on, they turn them on, and as they're...
Which, for the record, we're all sitting on the evidence table. That's why they're there.
Yep. They brought in everything that was in the truck, which I think that makes sense. That's a fine enough description. But as they're turning him on, Peter goes first, and he goes, "Do," and then Ray turns on his, and he goes, "Ray," and then Egon turns on his, and he goes, "Egon," and like Peter shoots him a look, and like you said, there's this shit-eating grin from Egon saying like, "Yeah, I did it," but like there was no Do Re Mi joke from the original. It feels like it's trying to do a twist on a joke that never happened.
But does it matter when it's a thing people know anyway?
But they like never turn them on in sequence like that. It was always just either one of them turns on or all of them turn on at once. There was no like one at a time building up thing.
I know, but I just don't think you necessarily need to set that up.
I don't know. It's just the way that they were playing it on screen, especially Egon's reaction and Peter's reaction, it felt like it was a callback. It felt like that was the definitive purpose of that joke, but there was nothing to call back to.
I think you're really fixated in this. I think it's meant to imply that they've done this before. I don't think it's necessarily like a callback to something that didn't exist.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Because I think it makes sense. It's completely self-contained. It makes sense on its own. You get what he was supposed to say, and he said Egon instead, and they shoot him a look to be like, really? Did you just change it to, like, promote yourself? You're putting yourself over?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's just kind of a joke that falls flat, because it would make sense if it was like Do, Re, Mi, and then Ray was the last one somehow, because that would be okay. It's Ray's name and it's the note. That makes sense. But to say it's Egon, I don't know. It just feels like it's a joke without a setup for me. That's my... if you think it's standalone, that's fine. But then I think then it's just not a funny joke.
Yeah, but the second word is Ray, and Ray says it. So I think the joke is the Egon says, instead of saying what actually comes next, I'm going to say my own name instead. Like, I think it works on its own. It's there.
But then Peter doesn't say his name, because then that still wouldn't have made sense either. It's two halves of a joke that don't come together to make a full joke.
What are you talking about? Peter starts it. He starts the phrase that's known. It's well known. It's a common phrase. Ray then says the next part, which happens to be his name. Yes. And Egon decides to say his name instead of saying the actual thing. That's it. It's set up. It paid off.
I disagree, but okay.
You can disagree, but I think the way you just described it made no sense to me. I don't think the fact that Peter didn't say his no name doesn't enter into this. It does not matter. That's not the point of the joke.
Okay. All right.
This is what you've got your knickers in a twist over. This.
It's a smaller symptom of a much larger problem with like the second half of this movie in terms of what I think that they don't do enough explaining for or enough setup for.
Okay. I think this works completely self-contained, honestly.
All right.
I genuinely do. Anywho. Yeah, so still, you have a bit of fun. The proton packs are on. They're beaming at the ghosts. Yep. Peter catches one. Ray catches one. Egon gets the trap in the middle. Boom, bam. There you go.
They literally had the exact same exit out of like the hotel from the last movie, where they're like, "We did it. We're the Ghostbusters. We're back."
Which I think is an intentional thing, not just for we want to repeat that moment. I think it's an intentional thing to say that was that point in the first movie where they become established in a real thing, and this is the point in this movie where they're a thing again. So I think that was an intentional callback to that.
Yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah. So we get a montage. We get them driving around in the Ecto-1. We get their new outfits. We get a couple of fun little ghost traps. There's one where there's like a ghost running across the river, or not across the river, along the side of the river, I should say. And like Peter's like undercover, sitting there with a trap ready, and it's like a little sting operation. Just like, okay, it's a fun little bit.
I appreciate the fact that they update their commercials. They now have Lewis and I always want to say Annie, but I know that's not her name. Is it?
Janine,
that's it.
Annie's the actress.
Janine are like, they're both in bed, and it's the same corny acting from the first one.
Oh yeah, they're terrible. Like, they're hamming it up. Yeah, like,
but it's still just so much fun to watch them do it.
My favorite part of it is that obviously it builds up to like, so they're in bed and there's a ghost, and Janine's like, "Oh, there's a ghost. Oh no, I guess we'll have to move." And then Lewis is like, "No, we won't have to move. He will." And he picks up the phone, and obviously this is all set up for her to say, "Who are you going to call?" But instead, Janine goes, "Who are you going to call?" And I thought, Janine, you had one important line.
One line here, Janine. We couldn't do a second take.
But I love that. I love that little mistake.
And then on the that's the first time the commercial goes around. The second time around, they specifically show that they have like a special going on. And I love how Egon pimps out. It's like, "That's right. If you call in now, we'll give you a Ghostbusters branded thermos and a balloon for the kids." And I'm like, this was Peter's idea. This was 100% his idea.
This is the pure capitalism. It's almost meta, because that's what the movie studio was doing with merch for the movie.
Yeah.
And then and I do appreciate that you see Dana looking at this, and it obviously, it's kind of mimicking the moment in the first movie where she's seeing the ad, but here it more felt like she was like comforted by seeing it again because it is something that was already established that she saw in the first movie.
And I do think it also is because now she is kind of blossoming this new relationship with Peter at this point, trying to make it work. She's happy to see that he's landing on his feet as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like, obviously, once Ghostbusters shut down, like 5 years ago, I'm sure that he had a tough time of, like, going back and trying to find his way again. So seeing that he's getting back to this thing that he loved from his past, she'll be like, yeah, no, it's great for him. Good job.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, all of this kind of plays out. Ultimately, it leads up to them. I think Peter goes to the gallery first, the museum, which is where Dana's currently working.
Yeah, so in between here, I always blank on this dude's name. It's like Yagosh or Janosh or something like that.
Janos.
Janosh, that's it. So he was, as we said, he was like zapped by the Vigo painting in the middle of the night. Like it came out.
He's kind of possessed, I guess, but not like. It's kind of like a 50-50 thing where he's still kind of him, but he's also possessed by the evil of the painting.
Yeah, he has some powers. It's very nebulous as to what they are. But
yeah, during the power outage, we have to talk about this.
Yes, exactly.
Where he creepily shows up at Dana's door to check if she's okay, and she's like, "Yeah, it's just a power outage. I'm fine. Go away." He's like, "Would you like me to come in?" It's like, "No, I'm good.
I'm good.
Yeah, okay.
Bye now." Close the door, and then as he's walking away, we see that his power is like he has night vision, which is demonstrated with glow in the dark eyes that like illuminate the hallway.
Well, I'm shocked you described that as night vision, because I would just describe it as he has flashlight eyes.
I mean, yes, I'm just assuming he's using them to see.
Well,
so,
yeah, I think he is, but like I don't think it's night vision. I think he's just floodlights are on.
Look, when I drive my car at night down the road and I have to turn on my headlights, I say night vision activate. Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
That's not night vision. Night vision's like all like green and like
it's infrared stuff.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So the primary plot for them.
Before we move on, it just reminded me of something I want to mention from the montage. It's a callback to Tully or Lewis Tully. I keep swapping between the first and the last name. Lewis and Tully's the same guy. There's a callback to him locking himself out of the apartment in the montage,
right,
where he tries to. So the big doors at the front of the Ghostbusters station, right, which used to be a fire station. You've got the big doors, which is open when the car's leaving, but you have like a sort of regular human-sized door that's kind of up a little bit and inside the door, and he sort of opens that, but the big door opens, and then he sort of like comes round and sort of almost locks himself out. I just thought it was funny. They keep this idea going that he struggles with doors.
Oh yeah,
I just thought that was funny.
That's fantastic. But no, the main plot of the movie was introduced even before the blackout happens, and that is Vigo needs a human host in order to start this new season of evil, which will start at New Year's on the 1989 or whatever. And in order to do so, he's basically saying, "Get me a baby." And I don't know if it could be any baby, but they're pretty locked in hard on Oscar. So
it certainly feels like it's locked in just because the slime targeted him in the very first scene of the movie. So It feels like he's picked his target, and maybe he's picked his target because she works there and he's seen her and he's aware through evil spiritual.
Sigourney Weaver is the tip-top pinnacle of genetics.
I mean, like,
yeah, I'm not gonna argue it.
She's fought many a xenomorph and lived to tell a tale.
Yeah.
This is a post-Aliens Ghostbusters 2. The first one was post-Alien, this one's post-Aliens.
God, I was waiting for so long in this movie for when like Vigo grabs Oscar and she just screams, "Get away from him, you bitch." Like, I was waiting so long.
They had enough class not to be that shameful.
Yeah.
I think they had enough class not to do that. Yeah. No, you're right. We kind of like, it's hard to almost like bring up the Vigo and Janos stuff separately because it is very separate. It's kind of been set up alongside all the other stuff. But Peter comes to see the museum, and immediately Janos is getting all jealous and is like, "Who's this? Who's your friend? Like, tell me about him." Yeah. And Peter's mocking the painting, saying he looks like a big idiot, and like mocking the pose and all the rest of it. And Janos starts talking about how he was a genius and a madman. And then Sigourney Weaver jumps in and is like, "Yeah, but he was also a homicidal like bigot and
a dictator."
Yeah,
evil.
I said homicidal. I meant genocidal. Even worse. So It just establishes that, and then they come back as a full team later to do some readings, which again Janos is not happy about. So yeah, I mean, I think this is where the pacing of the movie does feel like it is maybe not as tight as the first one for me. It's after the montage when we're just sort of like doing a lot of the plot, even though I like some of the things that happen in it. I like the idea of so one of the big things that happens around this part a little bit later on is the bathtub in Dana's place fills with ooze instead of water, and it tries to get her and the baby. It sort of comes. It's a great little practical effect of this thing coming up.
Straight out of the Blob.
Yeah. And she runs to Venkman's house, and we get some nice light-hearted stuff with him showing her around and joking about how like untidy everything is and the sleeping arrangements. But I thought actually it was very sweet. I thought their banter back and forth was quite nice. I like this part of the movie where he's like, "Hey, let's go and have dinner. I got his babysitters," which also sets us up with the Janine and Tully sort of like subplot or romance. So them kind of like getting to know each other. Like I thought all that was very pleasant. I think the pacing could definitely be tightened around this big chunk.
Yeah, I think that the biggest problem you have once you hit this middle section is that we were introduced at the beginning of the slime, and we're told, okay, it's supernatural to some extent. And over the course of the movie, we get more and more additions to that. We get Ray and Egon running tests on it, and they discover that...
Oh, is it time to talk about the toaster?
Well, I'll hold off on that just long enough to make this point, which is... they keep on developing the slime and saying that it has whatever properties it's able to do this stuff. But the Vigo stuff is also being developed much slower, but over the course of the movie in the same like pace. But they never quite bridge the two together. Like, obviously Vigo is linked to the slime in some way, but they feel like totally separate plots right up until the point that we hit the third act, where it's shown like, oh, they kind of exist together.
There's like a secret second layer to the painting that appears sometimes where you can see the river of slime underneath his face, which obviously links them. I think I kind of get how they're linked by the end. I admit they don't really go into it too much. It all kind of feeds into like how they ultimately save the day. So I'll save that for the ending when we're talking about how that all wraps up. But
if you go back to the first movie, you get the idea of, okay, we're introducing like these ghost dogs and this building and stuff like that. And within that jail cell scene, they tie all of it together and say, okay, it was this guy, this architect, there was a demigod, and like these are the creatures that it like uses to open the portal. Everything came together. I don't think that happened in this movie. I think that there was no point where they said, why does Vigo use slime? There, honest to God, is just no answer. Because honestly, he doesn't use slime. At no point does he ever like use the slime against the Ghostbusters in any meaningful way.
Okay, I've got some answers to that. But I do agree they don't do like a job like the first movie did of bringing it together and actually making it all feel very tightly woven. Like, I'll agree with that, absolutely. They don't have that moment at all. I do think it's unfair to say there is no answer, because I think I can kind of give you one. But it is very much, you have to kind of dig a little bit for it yourself and sort of think about it. But I will say, they don't have that connective moment where everything does just neatly fit together like that. So, but the toaster here is important. So they've been testing the slime and it responds to negative reactions, and they're yelling at it and it's bubbling. It's okay. But we also decide to test to see if it responded to positive things, right? So this all ties back into Egon's experiments at the start of the movie thematically. That's all very nice. And they're like, oh yeah, so what do you do to give it positive things? Do you tell it sweet, sweet nothings? Do you do this? Do you do that? And then there's a sort of beat where Venkman goes, wait, are you sleeping with it, Ray? And then Ray looks over at Egon, and Egon looks kind of embarrassed, and he's like, oh, Saul was the quiet one.
I completely forgot that was a beat in this movie, and it kind of caught me off guard in a very funny way.
I actually don't know if he's being so literal. Like, is he just meaning he has it in a jar on the bed with him, or is he actually suggesting that he has stuck his junk in it and...
I want you to think back to the first movie during the little dream sequence that Ray had.
Yes.
Where a very pretty ghost met him in his bed.
Believe it or not, I don't think we brought that up when we talked about the first movie. We kind of skipped over that scene. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, edit this in. There was a very pretty ghost. And she pulled down the zipper of his pants and he went cross-eyed and laid his head back. I don't think it's beyond Ray's purview to say, hey, Slime, you looking pretty good tonight.
Well, but that's the point, though. It's not Ray, it's Egon.
Oh, you think it's
in this scene, it's Egon that implies he's been doing it.
I think here's the way I read that scene is that Ray and Egon were both like aware of the testing that they were doing, like they were working together on the testing, and Ray kind of posited to Egon. He was just like, "Do you think sensually?" And Egon's like, "If you want to try, Ray, you go for it, man. I'm all for science. I do not have that ethics code."
I think the scene to me said it was Egon, but it doesn't really matter ultimately. But
no, it doesn't.
Let us know in the comments which Ghostbuster was having sex with the goo. Let us know.
We're gonna put all 4 as options, but if you pick the other 2, you're just wrong.
But then they show, okay, we've tried all these things, but one of the things that's actually very much responding to is music. And like, okay, we've put some of the ooze in this toaster, and the music makes the toaster kind of jump around as if it's dancing, like it's happy. Yep. And it's like, okay, so that's like a big thing it's setting up for later on. Which is where it kind of gets into the idea that the slime itself isn't inherently good or bad. I think the slime itself is just this kind of like force that is either like, if you fill it with good things and hope and happiness, then it can be used for good things. And if you fill it with hatred and evil and anger, then it can be used that way. So I think the connection to the Vigo is just that he is manipulating it by spreading hate throughout the city, and I think the ghosts coming from the slime are sort of helping do that, and that's why it builds up in the third act to be like, hey, we have to inspire everyone to think of good things to give us the fighting chance against it. I think that's what they're going for.
All right, so I had 2 problems with the slime. The first one you kind of just explained there, and it's much later in the movie, where they have figured out basically how to weaponize the slime, and they specifically say, oh no, don't worry, this slime is positively charged.
Yes.
And I guess I always took it as the slime is whatever is happening to it in the moment, not that it can actually like hold a charge. But I guess with your description there of saying it has some sort of residual memory to it, then I'm willing to accept that one. The second thing with the slime, though, is specifically the courtroom scene, which is, why do ghosts come out of it? I don't feel like that was ever properly explained. Like, yes, it has an emotional charge. That's fine, but why do ghosts come out of it?
It's never explained. But we see that ghosts are happening all over the city again, much like the first movie, because this slime's kind of on the rise. So I can only assume that it's drawing them out, whether they're coming from the slime itself, or if they're just like... Because the ghosts that show up in the courtroom are related to the location, not the slime itself. So I can only assume that it's... I agree that this is not explained, and even the stuff that you did sort of like my explanation for, that's not completely explained. I'm kind of drawing that from the pieces that it's given me. So, I agree that it's not completely delved into, but it's, I guess these things don't bother me that much, by and large. I think the pacing not being tight to me is a bigger problem for me, because I don't, like, fundamentally, this is the sort of movie where I don't necessarily need it to be tight like an Inception or something, where all the pieces link together and it's this like mastermind work of like the mythology. I can be loosier goosier with a Ghostbusters movie, but for me it's the craft of the movie itself that I want to feel tight,
Yeah, the pacing is a problem for me too, but I think the reason that I take issue with these sort of problems of not even explanation, like you said, I don't need it to be Inception levels. I don't need you to explain like, oh, the nerve in your ear can trigger you awake. Like, I don't need that. You tell me that this laser can catch ghosts, I'm down. Good. Awesome. A laser can catch ghosts. But they didn't offer any explanation. I need some, even if it's a token explanation, even if it like barely makes sense. I need something, but they just didn't offer that at all.
Yeah. It's not a big deal to me, but yeah, they don't explain why ghosts show up in that scene, other than the plot needs ghosts to be there for the big scene to play out. So
yeah.
Anywho, so as we go through this part of the movie, the slime tries to kill the Ghostbusters. Right, they've taken photos of the painting. Well, I say the slime. It's not really the slime. It's actually just like the force of Vigo sets fire to the dark room.
Yeah, we see Ray gets like entranced by Vigo for a second here as he's taking photos of him.
Yeah.
And that comes back in a semi-major way later.
Yeah, but ultimately they've been doing some more work in the slime, and they're like, shit, we have to go down and check this stuff out. And they try and rope Venkman into this, but Venkman set up a date with Dana. He's all dressed up. She's dressed up. Yep. And they're very excited about going on this date. So he's like, sorry, guys. I'm going to go hang out with Ripley. You go at the sewer.
Which I feel like is just more of that plot of growing up sort of thing, where he's like, yeah, no, Ghostbusters is cool and all, but adult relationships, that's where it's at.
Yeah. And I think it gives us the interesting trio of the other three. I've not mentioned this yet, but one of the things that I do actually want to point out at some point in this review is just how much of a chameleon Ernie Hudson is when you take away his mustache.
Oh my god, right?
It's like and what's so funny is that he has a mustache most of the time these days, and he looks like Ernie Hudson. He looks like Winston from the Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
But Ghostbusters 2 Winston, he looks so different. His hair's grown out a little bit, and he's shaved the face. That's all it is.
I will be fully honest with you. The moment that he popped up on screen, the moment they were in doing the kids' party, I had to pull out my phone and be like, why did they recast Winston here? And I was like, oh, wait, they didn't. Never mind.
This is, if there's ever proof that the Clark Kent glasses trick works,
yeah.
Ernie Hudson and his mustache, man, seriously, he looks like a totally different person without it. It's wild.
See, now that's why I really want to see the Henry Cavill mustache cut for Justice League, just to really send that home.
Yeah, but obviously as soon as you hear his voice, it's like, oh no, it's Winston. Okay, it's him. We know it's him. But it like, he looks so different without it. But yeah, they go into the tunnels, and they're all this yellow kind of like raincoat style looking gear, and they're doing their readings, and they're going down this train track, this abandoned train track down there. And I think this is a really fun sequence. This is like one of these sequences that stand out to me as being one of the reasons why, hey, Ghostbusters 2 is pretty cool. This sequence where they're going down the train tracks and they get kind of freaked out and they're like, maybe we should go back and get our proton packs because this is starting to get kind of creepy. And we get this scene where they're seeing all these heads on pikes, and that freaks them out, and then they hear a noise, and it's like, that sounds like a train. It's like, nah, it's impossible. This train track's not been used in decades. And it ends up being a ghost train, so we get this sequence where Winston doesn't jump out the way, but the other two do, and he stands there, and this ghost train just drives through him, and he's just screaming the entire time, because it's this weird out-of-body experience. I love this little scene.
I found it fun in the moment, but it wasn't one that really stuck with me by the end because
you poop head.
Yeah, no, I don't know. It was one of those things where it was cool in the fact that it did the special effects and all that, but in terms of actually like the plot, this was definitely more of just a, hey, let's have a little aside here, and like this isn't really going to impact the plot all that much.
I mean, if there is some connection between the ghosts and the slime, the fact that the slime follows right after these ghosts would certainly, link up with that.
No, I do think it was because of the slime that this scene happened, but if you cut this scene, nothing in the movie changes.
That's fair. That is completely fair. But it's good on its own. So yes, I don't have a problem with it in that sense. But it's also fun because obviously it's intercutting between the date with Venkman and Dana, and they're having the very serious conversation about why they broke up and why maybe there's clearly chemistry there. And then meanwhile, you've got Lewis and Janine having their whole thing. And Janine is not being subtle. Janine is coming on strong. Holy shit.
You're telling me that the Janine who was all up on Egon last movie is just like, hey, another glasses and smart-looking dude. Come over here.
She's like, I want a baby someday. And then puts her leg over his leg and goes, how about you? And I'm like, geez, Janine, maybe soften him up a little bit first.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. I'm happy Lewis found someone who's good for him. That being said, they did do a weird bit of characterization here, where as Lewis and Janine are talking, he says that like, oh yeah, I used to have roommates, but then my parents moved away, and I'm like, we saw your life beforehand. You were a successful accountant. I don't feel like that's your life beforehand, I
presume that happened before Ghostbusters 1. That's the only explanation for it.
That's fair. It was just weird the way they were kind of defining him as if he was a new character, but he had a full series of events beforehand. So I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah, that's fair. So there's some fun little bits here from him though, where when she says, "Oh, meet me," I'm babysitting, but you can come babysit with me, and he's like, "Oh, cool," and she's like, 8 o'clock at Venkman's place, and he's like, yeah, I'll get that from his W-2. Like, he always compares everything to how he can access it through his tax job. Because he's doing the Ghostbusters taxis, I guess, is what he's doing now. And he, when he's talking to the baby, he's explaining like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, I think, but he's explaining it through the idea of like, oh, she got them this gig, and it was very beneficial because it gave them a job, but they didn't have to pay taxes on it, which they really shouldn't do. But for the purpose of this story, it's, you know, I think it's okay. And I don't know, I got a kick out of all those little bits.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's fun writing. It's a nice little character bit. It's perfectly serviceable for what it is.
Yeah, I think, you know, when you talk about Ghostbusters 2, it's like less of a whole, but it's an assembly of a lot of great little things on their own. And I think that holds up throughout. But yeah, the 3 Ghostbusters in the sewer get slimed. They end up, the slime's flowing to the museum, so they come out of the sewer there. They're covered, and they like Ray and Winston start fighting. They start screaming at each other, and Egon realizes that because they're covered in the angry slime, that's what's making them do that. So they strip off. So they all get stripped down to these big pajamas that they've got on underneath their outfits. Which leads to them storming into the restaurant where Peter is and Dana to try and explain what they've seen and why this is a big deal and what's happening. They have to go talk to the mayor, and they get arrested. And if I honestly, I think if there's any like, oh, they did this again from the first one, I will happily jump on board with. It is probably the whole getting arrested and being locked away before the third act kicks in. I think that's the one. I appreciate they go to see the mayor and the mayor doesn't believe them at first, so it kind of subverts it a little bit. Yeah. But the entire thing of them getting sort of committed, I like the mayor's assistant character. I kind of like him because I like the actor playing the slimy role because I've seen him do it in a few things. But I do actually think his inclusion in this movie and what he does to the Ghostbusters just feels like a needless extra thing. I don't know if we actually need any of that. Yeah. So for the audience, the mayor's like assistant character here, he's basically, his sole purpose is to make it so that nothing can interfere with the mayor's governor run. He's there to keep everything shiny and clean, and the Ghostbusters coming after the mayor, essentially asking them to acknowledge the fact that they saved the world, is kind of a black spot. So he wants the Ghostbusters completely gone, no matter what it takes. Like during the courtroom scene, he actually talks to the prosecutor and was just like, get him put away for like 30 years, just totally gone. We don't have to think about him ever again. And so during this sequence, when they're trying to convince the mayor and say, hey, there's a river of slime, it feeds off of bad mojo, and all of New York City is nothing but bad mojo all the time. Once the mayor storms off saying that he doesn't want to deal with it, I just want to point out, there's a good line here where he says, being a shithead and acting horrible to other people is every New Yorker's God-given right. I thought that was a funny line. It was a funny line. I got a laugh out of that. But he goes away, and then the assistant says, like, well, hey, would you be willing to tell this to some guys downtown? And they say, yes, of course. And then smash cut, ironic cut to the 4 of them in straitjackets being led into a mental ward, which, you're right, it is pretty much the same bit. But the difference here is that during the jail scene of the last movie, it was prior to meeting with the mayor. So that way they were brought in and then could explain to the mayor, here's why we need to be free. But also, they accomplished something while they were in jail. They used that time to the benefit of solving the problem. This is just a one time they cut back to it for a funny little gag of them basically describing the plot and saying, yeah, doesn't that sound zany? It's basically just stalling them before they can actually get involved and try and solve the problem. It's almost like, okay, we're going to have this big scene, because the whole thing that happens here is that after they're locked away, the slime starts to go supernova because, all the stuff with the baby happens. Yosef, like, weird ghost form goes and takes the baby from the ledge. Well, like what? We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. But as this happens, we get a montage that's kind of similar to the montage in the first movie, but it's fun, though, because it's like all these ghost stuff happening. The Titanic arrives, which is probably one of the most memorable ghost bits out of these. I said in the last review, there was one ghost bit that I remembered, and I thought it came from the first one. It was the Titanic bit. That was funny, especially the line, better late than never again. Yeah. So this idea that the mayor then comes storming back in and says, holy crap, I'm going to go down the mayor. As the mayor of New York who'll let the city go to the 7th level of hell, where's the Ghostbusters? So all of this just builds up to eventually him firing his assistant because, no, we need the Ghostbusters, you idiot, and you had them committed, you fool. And it feels like if you just took out him committing them and just delayed the Ghostbusters wanting to act to after the big montage, you would have basically not lost anything of importance. It would have just been fine.
Like, during the courtroom scene, we specifically had them not acting until they got what they wanted from the judge. They specifically had that moment where they're like, look, you just sentenced us to, like, prison. You gotta undo that if you want us to attack these ghosts.
I suppose the other main purpose is so that they're contained somewhere whilst the baby kidnapping's happening, because arguably if they were around... Because Dana's still waiting for Venkman to come home at that point.
Yeah.
And, like, arguably if they were around, maybe that... I mean, you just rate it differently, I guess, but... That's part of why they're being kept away from it. I do enjoy the scene to a point where Dana's like, oh shit, the baby's went out the window and is crawling on the ledge on this tall building, and she goes out after him. Why there's a ghost version of Janos that flies in and
dressed as Mary Poppins.
It takes the baby. It's that thing, you don't realise it's him at first, I don't think. It's not until you get a good look at his face where you're like, oh wait a minute, that's Janos.
Yeah.
And flies him back off to the thing. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to agree with the idea they need to explain something and that this makes no sense, I'll give you this one. I'll give you this one, because there is absolutely nothing in the movie to suggest why this is possible.
There's two problems I have with this significantly. First off is that, like you said, they don't explain the power set, and assuming that he didn't get any new powers along the way, why did he not just do this a week ago? Why didn't he do this like at the beginning of the plot? It's like, oh, I need to get a baby. I feel like I can be Mary Poppins flying in a ghostly apparition form and just take the baby.
If I'm going to play devil's advocate and just propose a reason, this is not good enough, but I'll give it a go.
Okay.
Because the hatred and the fear's swelling, and that's tied to the ooze, it's giving Vigo more power, so he's able to let him do this as part of that. That's all I've got for you.
All right. I don't take it. But then
that's fine. I understand.
The secondary thing is that, as we find out, this whole process, this whole like sacrifice of Oscar and Vigo taking his place needs to happen as the new year comes in. So for whatever reason, they decided to make it that this doesn't happen at New Year's Eve. This doesn't happen like a couple hours before the ball drops. This happens a full day beforehand, so that we can then have a day of ghosts parading around New York instead. That part didn't make any sense. Why did we have a whole day where Dana was basically trapped in the art museum and we just had to deal with this?
Dana runs to the museum afterwards to go and try and get her baby back, obviously, because she realizes who's taken Oscar. And I guess you could just sort of write that off as, oh, they have to prep some stuff. It takes a bit of time. You know, it's not just like an instant thing. Whatever. I don't know.
It just seemed to me like the outside world, they specifically say, has gone a full day. Like, the baby is taken at night.
I don't think that's that much of a problem. It's nothing compared to Ghost Janos flying in, right? I think the timeline of it isn't, it's like, okay, they got him now so they could be prepared for when the time hits. Maybe they feel that they'd be cutting it too close if they left it till 10 p.m. before the midnight hits, you know?
That's fair, but it's more and more tiny little things that are compounding on me thinking that while I think Vigo is a more interesting character, everything about his plot just is so poorly explained the whole way through that by the time you hit the end, I have no idea what his goal is, what his power set is, and why in the hell that last little reveal happened.
Well, no, I get his goal. His goal is to be reincarnated and then bring upon his new level of dictatorship where he controls the world.
Right. However, he still is in human form as a baby. Like, is he going to still have ghost powers? Is there anything stopping Sigourney Weaver from just killing baby Oscar? Or them doing like an exorcism or something?
Well, I think there's one thing to stop her. Probably the fact that she has a bond with her son.
Well, fine. Egon can do it. He clearly has no ethics about it.
Look, we don't know, because we don't get to that point. So we do not know what the condition will be if he actually pulls this off. But
for the rest of it, in terms of like his like everything else about his plot, do you understand where I'm coming from in that it is very, very poorly done with a series of small little things that just don't make much sense to it?
I think I see it kind of the opposite way around. I kind of agree, but I see it the opposite way around, where
Okay.
I think the main thrust of it makes sense, but there's these small things that throw in like wrenches to it where it makes you question, like, okay, but why this thing? You know,
Right.
like Goshianos flying in and taking the baby. Like, okay, how that? Why that? How? What? Explain, please. I think the main thrust of it, though, which is that he just wants to, be reborn and take over the world as an evil dictator. That part, simple enough, makes sense.
Yeah.
I get that. So what happens is the Ghostbusters are let out of of the sanitarium, and Lewis is filling them in on what's happening, and they've been taken. They get the car. They go to they have their big entrance again in front of a crowd, but to subvert expectations, because this is kind of similar to the first movie where they come in the car and everyone's cheering them on, is their proton packs do nothing. Because by this point, of course, during this day, a wall of slime or a cube of slime has completely covered the museum so no one can get in. And the proton packs do nothing. And the crowd are like, oh, that's underwhelming. Oh, well, I guess we're screwed.
You suck.
So they're like, shit, what do we do? And this is where they get into talking about, okay, this slime can be manipulated to positive or negative, and we just have to inspire the people of New York with a positive idea, something that's pure, something that'll, that's what will penetrate the slime. It's not any forced per se.
I literally, as they were saying it, like, there was a long pause as Egon's doing this. He's like, we need something that can inspire people. We need, and then there's like a long pause, and I was like, a symbol? And he was like, a symbol. And I'm like, oh, okay, good. Glad I know this one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hell, if I didn't know where it was going, I might have thought they were going to get like a bat signal, but for the Ghostbusters logo, and just shine it into the sky and be like, the Ghostbusters are here. Look, I like the thematic side of what's been discussed here and kind of like what they accomplished. Again, based on the idea of inspiring everyone, there's kind of a sweet message in there about giving everyone this positive vibe to battle evil, and that's ultimately what saves the day. I like all that. Now, when we get to the actual details of what they do, obviously things get a bit silly here.
Yeah.
It's kind of this weird thing, though, but because I've grown up with this movie, I kind of just love it, no matter how stupid it is. But I do agree that it's pretty stupid. So, remember...
Just real quick, my opinion on that. I agree. I grew up with this movie as well. I don't know, like, why it was on in my head as much as it was. Maybe someone in my family had a VHS and was just like, oh, yeah, silly ghost movie. They would like watching that. But this scene, like this next sequence here, is like the biggest thing. When I think Ghostbusters, I think this sequence.
It is,
because it's just everything about it.
It's batshit insane in all the best ways, really. So their plan, if you remember earlier in the movie, the slime was put in the toaster, right? And it was bouncing around. And along since then, it's implied that they've been working on it. They've built these like slime guns and tanks, and they've figured out a way to positively charge the slime. So they've got that. It's Winston and Ray are wearing those, whereas the other two are wearing the traditional proton packs. Good for toy sales. We got more alternatives. But they're going to pump this slime all over the inside of the Statue of Liberty. And they've modified it a little bit. I appreciated that they modified it, because I was going to really complain about this if it's literally just the Nintendo Entertainment System fight stick that they use to control it. But you can see some extra bits of like boards and circuitry. Egon's had a little tamper with it. It's not just vanilla right off the shelf.
I appreciate that, because that was the one thing we said in the last movie, is it felt like everything the Ghostbusters had was just kind of salvaged. It was just stuff that they had sitting around and they modified to their needs. I appreciate the fact of like, we have to throw together something that can control the Statue of Liberty in like 30 minutes. And this is just what they came up with.
I appreciate it in that sense. I will admit though, like we see the NES fight stick, they mention Nike, like there's a few like brands brought up, and it does feel a little bit, okay, we're entering into because Sony movies are particularly bad for product placement, I find, and I feel like this is kind of dipping into that territory. I don't mind a little bit of it. I always say that sometimes avoiding product placement can almost be just as distracting sometimes, if they're like, oh, it's weird that we're in a supermarket, but everything in the background's all just blank labels. That's weird.
That's the modern day equivalent of being like, oh, let me just check it out on my nondescript PC here that has no logo on the back.
Yeah, it's funny how many people use MacBooks in movies that have a post-it note over the Apple logo. It happens a lot.
I on the comic show that I do, there was one comic that I didn't have like actually ready at the time of because I didn't know it was missing from a trade. So I had to load it up on my girlfriend's MacBook. But I was like, should I do the thing? So I got out a sticker of like the Flash logo and just stuck it on the back. And I was like, yeah, why not? No branding around here.
Yeah, until she's like, why can't I get the sticker off my laptop, you asshole?
Look, I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm not going to say I'm perfect.
So we get this ridiculous scene where they're hanging out in the top of the Statue of Liberty. The flame of the statue actually shatters and a real flame comes out purely for the visual of seeing an actual flame at the top of the statue. And then it starts walking. We see the feet come up and it walks through the water. So it's sort of like only dipping out of the water a bit. You know, it's just the head and the hand basically. Mm-hmm. And then they get to the city. Obviously we get them. This is kind of like their flip side of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. This time the giant thing's something the Ghostbusters are using to save the day. I thought the effects here were quite interesting because in the wide shots, I was looking for how they were doing this, and I realized that they actually just did it sort of Godzilla style, where there was a person. Right. They had a mask on, so it wasn't like it was a person's face painted. It was like it looked more like a statue because the mask was like fixed and just a solid face.
It was essentially a very professional Halloween costume.
Yeah. And someone's obviously walking kind of stilted as if it's, concrete that's moving or whatever. But
I'd say it's probably slowed down significantly.
Yeah. But ultimately it's a person in a suit for the wide shots, and then obviously you've got your close-ups or whatever. But I'm like, okay, like this is just one of those weird things where I'm sure at the time a lot of the negative reviews just thought this was stupid, and it kind of is, but I guess in a weird way, I respect that as much as there's some beats that are played again from the first movie are subverted, I kind of loved it as far as the plot goes. They just said, oh, we're just going to do whatever crazy shit we want, and this is the crazy shit we want to do.
Yeah.
As opposed to some of the modern movies, which feel like they're so tied to, like, no, we want to, like, meticulously recreate what the first movie did. More thoughts on that in a couple of movies' time.
Yes.
So I kind of appreciate that there's kind of a shameless quality to this.
I get what you're saying, but I also feel like that's kind of indicative of like they did one draft, maybe two for like and I'm not saying like dialogue wise, I probably went through a couple, but in terms of the larger building blocks of the movie, this feels like the sort of thing where they were like, we are going to have the Statue of Liberty march up and we'll save the day. And nobody ever said, you sure? Like, did you set that up well enough? Did you really make that work? I think that, honestly, that could have worked so much better in the movie if there were any other shots of the Statue of Liberty throughout the movie.
Okay.
Like, even one. I feel like they just were kind of like, we need a symbol. And they looked at the Statue of Liberty and it's like, oh, wow, that symbol that I have not seen referenced at all during this movie.
Yeah,
at any point.
I guess the logic is we obviously all know it because it's just like a real thing.
Right.
I do agree, though, that maybe having the opening shot of the movie be the Statue of Liberty and then never bring it up again, just so that when it cuts to this point, you're like, oh, that's why the movie started on that, is because we're going to use it or something. I don't know.
You could very easily have it be like, okay, the mayor's doing like a governor's speech or something on Liberty Island. Like, bam, boom, there you go. As easy as that. So, yeah, basically the good vibes of all the people. And singing whatever that song is, which is also great from the soundtrack.
Yeah. They crush a cop car or two. Nothing too serious.
Definitely gets me pumping patriotic.
But yeah, they basically... And they're getting towards the building, but once we're inside the building, we see that, Dana's like had to snatch the baby because she actually pretends that she's going to go along, because Janos is like, oh, we're going to get married. You could learn to love me, right? And she's like, yeah, I could. And obviously she's just playing along. But
yeah, there's some benefits to being the mother of a god.
You could get a nice apartment, free parking. Yeah, she'll give up her son's soul for free parking. Yeah, I'm sure that
in New York. Yeah, you consider it.
Yeah, but most people in New York don't drive for that reason.
That's true. I actually just went to New York like a few weeks ago, so this is really ringing true to me. Of like, yeah, nah, I wouldn't do that.
There's a reason why most people in New York just get cabs or the subway, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
And to be fair, we never see her drive in this movie.
No, in fact, when they go out on date night, she calls for a cab. So.
Exactly. Which, to be fair, could just be because they're planning on drinking, so you don't take the car, but,
Very responsible. Entirely possible.
Yeah.
That being said, they do both share a glass of wine, so...
What's your point?
They were clearly drinking to some extent.
Yeah, but why are you phrasing that as if it's like a counterpoint? Like, that just backs up what I said about them drinking.
Right. Sorry, I think I lost the plot somewhere in there.
Right. So I cracked the line, and it's not even a joke. I don't know why I'm saying it as if it was a joke. I just said, but they were drinking, so it's possible even if one of them did have a car, they're just not taking it because they know they're going to be drinking. Right. And then you said, but to be fair, they were sharing a bottle of wine, and I'm like, well, yeah, exactly. That just goes along with what I said. But you said it as if it was like a counterpoint. So I don't understand. I don't understand. I'm confused.
Cut back like a minute and a half ago.
Never, but go on.
And you're right, Pete. They had 2 glasses of wine. They did that. Correct.
It was just the way you said it. Like, what you said was factually completely correct. I'm like...
This just goes more to prove my Egon was weird the way he said that line earlier on. It's all about how you say it that makes it sound weird.
It's a weird way to make a point. But okay. We'll go with it. We'll go with it. So yeah,
Statue of Liberty busts in through the ceiling.
Yeah,
Dana gets
right
the
in the
baby.
nick of time, because like Dana's been like, restrained or whatever, and Vigo's gone after the baby. Vigo's not materialized yet, but like
you see like his corporeal face like on top of the baby, like he's imprinting her on it.
Yeah, it feels like time's about to run out, and it's like a big heroic moment. Looks like there's a lot of relief on her face as she looks up and sees the Ghostbusters rappel down through the skylight and whatnot. And from here, they kind of like play on what's been set up here, where like the slime and indeed Vigo himself reacts to negative enforcement. So they kind of basically start. They all get slimed and they all get sort of basically paralyzed. They can't move. They're on the floor.
Right. So they take out Janish first by just sliming him and saying, it's positively slime charged slime. He'll be fine.
Yeah,
when he
basically,
wakes up.
Ray and Winston cover him in their goo.
Mm-hmm. And then as they try to proton pack the painting, it blasts back at them and starts paralyzing them all. And then we get the like physical embodiment of Vigo, like somehow doesn't need a human host. It's just here. It shows up.
Well, almost. It's kind of. It's a simple effect, but they do this sort of ghosting thing where he's kind of phasing in and out, like he's struggling to become corporeal.
Right.
Like he's trying his best. It's almost there, but not quite.
Which does feel like this idea that it's only because of the negative emotions in the world that he is able to get this much power. But he goes over to where Venkman hid the baby because at this point Dana has also been like captured by a rope or something.
No, it's like a hose. Like it's not the vacuum cleaner, but it's almost like a hose for like the air conditioner or something in the ceiling that's came down and grabbed it.
So at that point, all the Ghostbusters frozen, he goes over, grabs the baby, and that's when Peter has the idea of, okay, negative reinforcement. And he just starts tearing into Vigo with like all of these insults of how stupid he is to have his new world order beginning in New York, of all places.
I kind of love it because it's like Venkman was born to like save the day this way. It's to be a dick to someone.
Quick, if only we have someone with harmless but still witty banter. Perfect.
Oh dear. And yeah, that's basically saves the day.
So it's enough that they're able to. Honestly, I'm having.
They get back up. Like
that's even the thing. It's just a stalling tactic to like annoy him, because then all of a sudden outside, everybody who's outside stops being angry and they start singing Auld Lang Syne. And that good vibes, the humanity of everyone coming together New Year's Eve is enough to ruin the negative emotions.
To be fair, they're already like not angry when the statue comes in. Like that's kind of what picks them up initially, because that makes the slime open up to let them in the first place, and then it's the singing that kind of is like the surge of positive reinforcement. And we should probably go back at this point because out of nowhere, a little side plot for Act 3 is introduced. And this is actually the weird thing, is I always remembered this happening, but I did not remember that there's almost no build up to it. It just cuts suddenly during the third act to Janine sexily zipping up Tully. He's in and I like this detail. He doesn't have his own name badge because it's not his suit. It's one of Egon's suits that he's wearing. Yeah. But she zips him up, and she's like, "You were born to wear this suit." And he gets the proton pack on, and he runs. He has a big moment where the doors open, and he runs out, and then just sort of says that, this stuff's heavy. And then the second Slimer scene happens where he has to get the bus to where everything's happening.
Yeah.
And for some reason, Slimer's driving the bus. I don't have an answer for that. Okay, I just don't.
At that point, I can accept it more because it is already, all the ghosts have overrun the city. And as we saw before in the last movie, there was like a ghost taxi cab driver. Like, sure, I'm willing to accept that, this bus was left abandoned and Slimer's just like, I'm going to have some fun. It still is shamelessly just putting Slimer in a place where he doesn't belong, but I'll take it.
Yeah, I do kind of like the idea though that he gets to the scene, right? He gets outside and he basically tries to do what the Ghostbusters did initially, where he just blasts the proton pack at the slime wall. And I like the idea that whether or not he had any effect or not, and I think the argument would probably be that he probably didn't. The idea that maybe combined with all the Auld Lang Syne singing, that his little like beam was just that little tip over the iceberg of like, because they were weakening it, he was able to sort of like help get rid of the slime, and that also helped weaken Vigo. If you want to look at it that way,
that's fair. I just the way that they play Tully, he's always just the hapless loser. I don't think they did anything to build him up to being a big hero moment. It definitely felt more like it was all of what was going on inside. So I feel like this is kind of just the, hey buddy, we know we treated you poorly at the end of the last movie, but this time the entire crowd is going to think that you're the hero.
It's all heartwarming anyway. Like, I think I like the idea that maybe he just tipped the balance just a little bit. Like,
that's fair.
It wasn't much, but it was just a little nudge that it needed. But yeah, so yeah, they blast Vigo with all their various proton packs and slime juice.
Vigo goes back into the portrait, and then as they're about to blast him.
Okay, this is random. What the painting turns into is random as shit. I'll give you this.
No, because there's one little last minute plot beat that I feel completely doesn't fit in. You forgot about it too.
Did I?
Ray stares into the portrait again, and then all of a sudden he is possessed by Vigo.
You're right. I did forget about this.
Yeah. So Ray, he looks into the portrait again. They say, Ray, can you move? We're going to try to shoot the painting. And then he turns around, and it turns out he's now possessed by Vigo. He's become the human host or whatever.
This must be quick, because this is not ringing a bell.
It is. It's only like 10 seconds, because then the next thing they do is they blast the portrait and they slime Ray, and that's all it is. Then it's automatically solved. And that it's such a random little bit in there where it's like, why did we bother with this?
One last bit of threat, I suppose, before they're done.
I guess. I don't know. It feels like they only did it because they had that earlier scene where Ray got entranced by the portrait. But that only feels like it exists to do this last scene. So all in all, it feels like a completely dead-end subplot that didn't need to happen at all.
Yeah, but they couldn't cut it out because he's slimed for the rest of the scene. So they had to keep it in at least a little bit.
That's probably it. That's probably the whole reason it's in there.
Yeah, I think that's probably meant to tie in and give him a little bit more to do, but mainly to tie into the idea that he was the idiot who thought of the Marshmallow Man. So the idea that he's mentally weaker and can be taken over. I think that's maybe what they were going for with that.
That's fair.
Like you say, I think they probably trimmed it down. It's basically nothing now, but because he ends up slimed for the rest of the scene, they have to have it in a little bit to explain that.
That makes sense.
So,
I don't like it, but that makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, basically they go out, the credits start playing basically instantly as soon as they walk outside and the theme starts playing. However, as the titles are playing, you get like little snippets of things that weren't in the rest of the movie of all the actors just doing various things. And that's nice to see. It's a fun little bit. And there's arguably something that almost counts as a mid-credit scene, because at the very end of the titles, you see them getting like a medal from the mayor at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty. So it's like, okay.
Yeah. It's a nice little wrap up for the thing of their plot saying, yeah, now we are all recognizing the Ghostbusters. We can't sweep this under the rug. It definitely happened.
And I'm not saying it's telling a grand story about it, but it does make sense that you've got the corrupt politician taking credit for the people who actually did the work. Like that, Like, I'm not saying they're doing a big thing with that theme, but it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. We did skip over, because I wanted to say the right thing, that portrait and what it turned into.
Oh, yes.
They zap the portrait, and then they kind of deal with some other subplots, wrapping that up, making sure Dana's okay. And then they come back to it, and it is a, like, medieval Renaissance style looking painting of the 4 Ghostbusters wearing togas all around the baby Oscar. And they just leave that. That's just, it was there now. That's happened.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I enjoyed the build up to it when they all sort of are looking at the painting, and like everyone sort of steps into frame, so it's this big wide shot of the 4 Ghostbusters plus Dana, and they're all just kind of like in shock of what they're looking at. And then you see the painting, and you're like, but why? Why is it turned in? Like, at least if it turned into a painting of them right now, I'd be like, oh, maybe like all the energy bounced back and the slime's kind of done this or something. But specifically to do it in this style, and for Dana not to be on it is weird, because it's like,
yeah,
but whatever. I mean,
in terms of my problems with the plot, I'm willing to give this one the biggest pass, just because it is no relevance. Like, the plot is done. This is solely just to have a little funny joke at the end, but it is also the one that has the least possible explanation in the movie.
I think that's fair. Yeah, like, you know, I've fought you on a few things that you didn't think were explained or added up. There's some that I agree with for sure.
Ghost Janosch.
Yeah, Ghost Janosch being the biggest culprit. And then I do think there's definitely some pacing that's just not as tight as the first one. It's not even terrible pacing. Like, there's definitely much worse paced movies. Like, there absolutely is.
Oh yeah.
It's, you know, it's like 10 minutes longer than the first one. It's not that much of a difference. It's way more egregious in other things, but it definitely, you feel it next to the first one, because the first one is so tightly paced, and every single scene advances everything. Yeah. And it's not even that this movie doesn't advance stuff with most of its scenes, because most of them do, but it's just that there's maybe too much to do to set up the back half of the movie once we actually get to the point where the Ghostbusters are there. But like I said, I love several moments that are in this. I love the villain. I really love the courtroom stuff. There's still a lot of great little lines that come from various characters. Egon's got a few standouts, I think, in this one. You know, I think it's very easy to still like this movie a lot, even with its problems, even though it's not this pinnacle light in a bottle movie that the first one was, because the first movie was special. This is a sequel to a special movie, but I think it's a fun sequel to a special movie.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree pretty much on all of that. I think that the hardest comparison here is when you compare it to the first one. Like, it's a fine movie on its own. You can get enjoyment out of it, but it's when you watch it like back to back with the first one, you feel just how different it is across the board. Like, you're saying that the pacing is off here, and I do agree, but I think that the pacing is off because the last movie, it had a joke every like 10 seconds. Every 10 seconds was a punchline, was a laugh, was something going for it. This one goes for much longer stretches before it ends up hitting the punchline again, which makes it feel like these scenes are a lot more drawn out than they actually are. So I agree there is a pacing problem. I just put it more on the fact of I don't think it was as funny as the last one. And that's kind of what the biggest problem was last movie. I was struggling to pick out a single quote to open up the review with, because there was so many to choose from. I was overjoyed with riches there. This one, I was also struggling, but for the opposite reason, that I didn't think there were enough like single one-liners in this movie that really made a hard impact. So yeah, I think it is just a difference in writing quality that really brings it down for me. Not a horribly written story. I think that it's a good enough time, and it is a decent follow-up to the first one, but it is still much, much less than the first one was.
Yeah, actually, another example early on of a joke that's kind of like a callback or an evolution to a joke in the first one. One of the best jokes in the first movie is are you menstruating right now? Was that got to do with anything? Back off, I'm a scientist. The follow-up to that kind of here is at the end of the scene in Dana's apartment, Egon says, oh, I'd like to inspect the mother gynecologically. I'm struggling to say the word, but you know what I'm trying to say. And then Venkman goes, wouldn't we all? And it's like, okay, it wasn't terrible, but it's definitely a big step down from the sort of, similar joke in the first one,
Yeah.
Plus it's a little bit crude as well. Like I don't think the jokes typically in Ghostbusters come across as very crude, whereas that one actually is kind of crude when you stop and think about what he's actually saying.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that, again, that's just going back to what I said of, it feels like there were a couple drafts here, but it just lacks that snappiness that the original one had that really made it something special.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So, no, and I think it's also fair to say that while I don't think it's anywhere close to some of the later movies, there is almost those first hints of treating the first movie like something to be, stuff like putting in Slimer, things like that, where it feels like the early examples of maybe kind of just banking on. It feels weird to call it nostalgia at this point because it's only 5 years since the first movie, but banking on the fact that people love the first movie and they're just putting something in here because people like it from the first movie. That's going to get much worse in future movies, but there's a little like early hint of it here for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think once you have enough time pass, it is just nostalgia, but I think that the number one thing in marketing is make the audience of your ad feel good. And familiarity is the number one thing that makes people feel good. So if you keep bringing stuff up from the first movie...
That's second. First thing that makes people feel good is Bustin'.
Bustin' does make me feel good. Yeah.
That was worth interrupting. That was worth interrupting you for that joke. You know it was.
You know what? Mark down the timestamp wherever we're at. Best joke Pete's made this year so far. Let's see if he can top it.
Joke of the show. Let's just call it joke of the show, right?
There you go.
We can have a joke of the show every episode, okay? That's this week's.
You've been ending the episodes with the diplomatic immunity. Switch it over. Bustin' makes you feel good. There you go.
Busting a nut makes me feel good. No, wait, that's not what I meant to say.
Nope. Jeez. Bit crude. Damn you, Ghostbusters 2. Anyway, ratings-wise, just to get into that.
Yeah, that's what we're getting to. Yeah, we're wrapping up and sort of summarizing thoughts. So what you rating Ghostbusters 2?
I mean, it's going to sound really harsh. It's because I gave the last one a 10, but try to view this individually, trying to say that this is its own thing. I'd say it's probably a 7.5. I think that it's a fine movie. It's perfectly good. It's a fine enough sequel, but I think that it is a major step down from the first one. And honestly, I think that's probably why it gets so much negative reception is people really like the first one. They watch this and they say, that's not the same thing. That's not what I wanted. And that's why it's so much more negative than it seems. I
think, I said this in the first review, but I think people who are our age or between our ages, because I'm a little bit older, who grew up with both of them just existing together, we don't have that like weird opinion of the second one where it's like, oh, this thing that came later that like we sort of view them as a pair. We kind of like evaluate them a little differently because of that. I think people who are older and were around when the first one came out are probably a lot harsher about Ghostbusters 2 than we are. But I actually am giving it the same score. I think 7.5 is the right score for this. I think it's good. Arguably even at times very good, but not hitting that great line, which is where I think an 8 kind of represents.
Right.
But I like it about as much as something I can like without it being great. So I think 7.5 is where I land as well.
All right. And then in terms of making the cut, I think it's pretty obviously makes the cut.
Yeah.
It's not a cut above, but it's not anywhere close to being out of the collection. It's just good movie, can stand on its own, but not quite. Yeah. I would say if you can find a box set of the first two movies, there's no reason not to get that.
For sure.
And if you get Ghostbusters 2 just on its own, still a fine purchase, just not quite as good.
Yeah. I think it's, again, I've always kind of viewed them as a pair, and I always watched them, not back to back in like the same day, but if I watched the first one, I always watch the second one, soon after. It's always something that I do. Whereas, what's interesting about getting into these next couple of movies is I've only seen them once. I saw 2016 when it came out. I saw Afterlife when it came out. So I'm excited to talk about them.
I, once again, have not seen either of them. So I'm going in completely blind, save for I remember the wrath that 2016 caused on the internet. That's my exposure.
And the wrath that it caused was stupid because it was very misogynistic. And that is not the angle of which any critiques will be coming from. I can promise you that when I'm talking about that movie. But yeah, I'm not overly looking forward to watching it again. But we'll see. Maybe I'll see more to like. I've kind of went on a weird path with that one. I was kind of like trying to like be nice about it when it came out, so I was trying to be a bit more positive than everyone else was, despite having a lot of problems. And over time, I'm like, nah, I don't really like it that much. And so I'm very curious to go into it again and properly dissect it.
Going in as true neutrals this time.
Yeah. So Afterlife I've only seen once as well, but that's obviously a lot newer and fresher in my head. So I'm pretty confident in how I feel about that. So yeah, but that's obviously the next 2 episodes is 2016 and Afterlife. So
I will say 2016 apparently they kind of pulled a live die repeat sort of thing.
Yes, for a while I feel like it's kind of changed back now, but for a while if you looked at it anywhere online to buy it digitally or streaming, it's called Ghostbusters Answer the Call, I think.
Yeah.
Which is like, okay, you're playing a bit fast and loose with your naming there. But okay.
I mean, if that's the way they want to call it, just so it's not Ghostbusters 2016, I'm all right with it, but it's always going to be Ghostbusters 2016.
Yeah, it's weird. So obviously that's the next couple of weeks. I'll tack on here that the newest trailer for the new one, Frozen Empire, came out this week that showed a lot more stuff in it. I won't get into it too much. I will say though, it was like a checklist of like, hey, remember this, remember this, remember this. We've brought this thing back. We've brought that person back. We've brought this thing back. Oh, there's that line referencing this thing. I'm a little concerned.
Believe it or not, we're just going to show you the 1984 movie again. You're not even going to know it.
Well, my hope after the first trailer is like, okay, you know what? You've got your nostalgia thing out the way with Afterlife. Maybe because you're doing like a new original villain this time, you're going to just have fun. Like, okay, let's do a Ghostbusters story with these new characters and have fun. I believe someone somewhere cited that the animated stuff is kind of an inspiration. This is going to be like an episode of that where we've just got this fun villain and we're going to do stuff. But the new trailer is like full of remember this. And I'm concerned that somehow because Afterlife's already very nostalgia like heavy. Somehow they've found a way to make this just as nostalgia heavy based on this trailer. So
I guess we'll see. I've avoided all the trailers coming up to this, so I don't know exactly what they're bringing back, but I'm sure it's literally everything. You know what I kind of wish we did? I kind of wish that we would have made like a little checklist over these first 2 movies of like the things that could be nostalgia bait, just to see over the course of the 2 movies how many we could check off.
Yeah, it feels unfair to do it now because I've seen like a good list of them now for the new one. Not all of them, because there's rumors of at least one more thing that wasn't in the trailer that I'm expecting to come back.
Well, how about this? I'll make my own bingo card.
Sure.
And I'll see how many I can get off that.
Anywho, there you go. That's the show, everyone. That's been the Collector's Cut. This has been Ghostbusters 2. Like I said, we'll be back next time with Ghostbusters 2016. Let us know what you thought of this one in the comments. Of course, I said at the start that we do some bonus shows on Patreon, and if you want to support all the content, you can get access to that bonus stuff at a couple of different tiers. $3 gets you the first bonus show, which is the Criterion Cut, where we review movies from the Criterion Collection. And then $5 and up per month gets you access to extra reels, where we do the opposite of that. We review some of the worst things ever made. Hopefully so bad they're entertaining, but that doesn't always work out that way, unfortunately.
Nope.
So, yeah. But hey, that's the show, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully you've enjoyed going down memory lane, because I assume for most of you this is a memory lane episode, because it is Ghostbusters. But we get to the more spacey stuff next week.
We get to Sony remembering they had an IP to exploit.
So thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic immunity.